Okay, thank you everyone for joining. Obviously, tonight's going to be a discussion on Shavuot. Please God, next Sunday night is the beginning of Shavuot. Next Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday is Shavuot. Barbara, you've got your hand raised. I don't know if you want to ask a question, or if that was a mistake. Barbara?
Yes. I don't know what I've done here.
No
Sorry
problem.
about that.
Not at all. Not at all. No problem.
Okay, Rabbi.
No problem.
Thanks.
Okay, so yes, it's going to be on Shavuot. It may very well be things that you're all familiar with, but I just want to put everything together in a shiur just to prepare us, obviously, for Shavuot. Okay, it's recording. Yeah. Okay, so just to begin, to go through maybe the different names of Shavuot. So obviously Shavuot, Chag Shavuot, what does Shavuot means? It means weeks. Shavua in Hebrew, we say Shavua Tov on a Saturday night. Good Voch is a Yiddish, but Hebrew Shavua Tov, we wish you a good week. Singular week, plural Shavuot, so it's a festival of weeks. Where do we have that from? Because the Torah commands us, you shall count. Ushvartem lachem macharat hashabbat. You should begin counting after the first day of Pesach. Yom Aviachem Omer Hatnufa. We'll go into the Omer offering and the 2 loaves that were brought. But the first reason, and it's hinted in the name, Shavuot, it's the 7 weeks that begin on the second day, second night of from Pesach up until the day before Shavuot, which culminates the 50th day, that being Shavuot. And again, we have what I said to you now is Fartem Lachem. That's the words in the book of Vayikra. We have it in Devarim as well. Trying to think of the exact citation there. Okay, I can't think of it offhand, but they're the same idea of 7 weeks. Then the Gemara, interestingly enough, refers to Shavuot as Atzeret. And Atzeret means the end. And again, it makes perfect sense because Shavuot is seen as the Atzeret, the end of that process, which began on the second day of Pesach with the counting of those 7 weeks, which culminates in Shavuot, which is the Atzeret, which is the end, the finish of a period, that period being the 7-week Sephira count. Ramban Nachmanides takes that concept a little bit further, the concept of Atzeret being the end of a certain period, that being the period of the 7-week count. And he says, if we think of Sukkot, what comes after Sukkot? It's Shemini Atzeret, because that's also the culmination, that's also the conclusion of that particular period. So similarly, Shavuot marks the end of a period. Obviously, when it comes to speak about the giving of the Torah, but Maimonides Rambam sees it almost as a continuation, almost sees it that you've got 2 Chagim, 2 festivals joined to each other, that being Pesach and that being Shavuot. And in fact, it makes perfect sense because when Hashem takes us out of Mitzrayim, which is obviously what Pesach is all about, it wasn't just freedom to do with what you like, but it's so that Laman Tavdul Alahar is going to be that you're going to worship me, you're going to serve me on the mountain being Har Sinai, where the Torah would be given. So Pesach in itself wasn't an end, it was a means to an end, the end being the giving of the Torah on Shavuot. Of course, we also know that Sfirat HaOmer, just like it was historically, that very first 7-week period going from the Exodus from Egypt up until when our ancestors received the Torah on Mount Sinai, was a period for them to become purified, to become prepared to receive the Torah. You know, it's all very well to take the Jews out of Egypt, but there's a period of taking Egypt out of the Jews. All that they had become, all that they had been tainted environment of the Egyptians. They were pretty much similar to the Egyptian captors. It was just that Hashem took Rahmanos on his people, gave them the mitzvot of Brit Milah, the mitzvah of the paschal sacrifice, by virtue of those two mitzvot. But the Mayi Chaim, you're going to live by those mitzvot. He took us out. So again, it was a period where they got their physical freedom, but they're not yet ready to be those vessels to receive the Torah. That was the 7 weeks preparation, rectifying, so to speak, one personality trait after another until they'd be perfected in a sense to receive the Torah. And the Sefer HaChinuch, he goes through the meaning of the mitzvot. He says it similarly. Again, the period of Sfirat Omer now. Just want to mute someone. Okay, I think everyone else is on mute, so that's fine. Sorry about that that break. So again, the period now that we go through each year from Pesach to Shavuot is that same 7 weeks of rectification, of looking, of introspecting, going into ourselves, to seeing what can we do to further improve on ourselves, so that when Shavuot comes again around, that we're in a position to again receive the Torah, so to speak. And I'll go into that a little bit more depth a little bit later, and to how heighten our spirituality in preparation for Shavuot. Again, then we also know that Shavuot, another name for Shavuot, is first fruits. It's the festival of the harvest. Why? Because it was the first fruits that were harvested. The Pasuk in the book of Shavuot is V'chag HaKatzir Bikurei Ma'asecha, the festival of harvesting the first fruits of the produce that you planted in the fields. So this was Shavuot marked an agricultural milestone, the beginning of the harvest season. In fact, you have to find it. I spoke about it at the beginning, that the special offering of the 2 loaves alludes to this particular aspect of Shavuot. Why? Because the loaves are obviously made of wheat, and wheat from the beginning of the harvest is consecrated for that particular sacrifice. Many of you that come to my Parsha Shiur know that I often bring the commentary of the Sforno, and the Sforno on the idea which speaks about bringing the 2 loaves offering from the first wheat. He says that it was the beginning of the wheat harvest, and that's also why the festival is called the Day of the First Fruits, Yom HaBikurim. He says, Nikra, it's called Chag Yom HaBikurim, the festival of the first fruits. It's interesting to note that, okay, so you think it's the festival of harvest. Who is involved in agriculture? Who is involved in the harvesting? The farmers. Okay, so we know we're supposed to be joyous. All of the Chagim, V'samachta b'chagecha, you're supposed to be joyous in your festival. Okay, so it's a festival of harvest. Let the farmers be joyous. Let them celebrate. Why is it that everyone else has to celebrate as well? So it's the ability to celebrate in the mitzvah of the Bikurim, the mitzvah of bringing the first fruits of the 7 species of the land of Israel to the Beit HaMikdash, while it stood to the temple to give to the Kohen, to give to the priest. Maybe lesser known aspect of Shavuot, it's also the day of judgment for the fruit of the trees. So it's one thing saying it's a season of harvest, but what's the harvest going to be? It's all very well saying this is the time, but if the crop is shvach, if it's a bad crop, what's it all about? It needs to be quality and quantity. So the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah tells us that on Shavuot, the world is judged. And just like we know Rosh Hashanah, man is judged, on Shavuot, the world is judged to determine how productive, what is the quality that the fruit-bearing trees are going to produce, are going to give forth in the coming year. Again, that also ties up with the 2 loaves that were brought, that offering, because what we're doing by bringing that offering to Hashem, it's also asking that that being part of the wheat, being part of the harvest, that the fruits, everything should be blessed in lieu of this sacrifice, in lieu of this offering that we were offering to Hashem. And of course, goes without saying that Shavuot is the festival of the giving of the Torah. But it's interesting to note that in the Chumash, in the Torah itself, we don't have the concept, we don't have the terminology of Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of the Torah. It's not written in the Chumash. Where I spoke of Vayikra, I spoke of Devari, and the allusion to not the allusion, where Shavuot is mentioned, doesn't refer to the Zman Matan Toratenu. It's only in the Siddur, where we daven, the Amidah, where we say the Kiddush, that we say Chag HaShavuot Hazeh Zman Matan Toratenu. But not expressly, not explicit in the Torah do we have that is called Matan Torah. Wow, I mean, it seems absolutely strange. That's really the pivotal, that's really the main. Those of you listening now, it's okay, the harvest, the counting of the weeks, great, but Torah, that's it. It was given on Shavuot. That's what we celebrate. Yet the Torah, it's not called Zman Matan Toratenu. You also, as I said, we have the concept of the loaves that were brought, and maybe, and I'm going to refer to a Kli Yakar that gives us an explanation through the loaves that were brought as an offering, why perhaps it's not said expressly in the Torah, Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of giving of the Torah. Okay, so the Kli Yakar says regarding the loaves that were brought. So when we speak about the offering, it says V'yikraftem mincha chadasha laHashem. You need to offer a new offering, mincha chadasha, a new offering. That obviously refers to the 2 loaves. What does the Kli Yakar learn? This Kli Yakar is a commentator on the Torah. He says that it's a sign of the day of the giving of the Torah, because Torah needs to be new, fresh, new to a person, as if he received it from Mount Sinai that very day, every single day. And when we celebrate Shavuot, we really need to feel that we're again receiving the Torah. We have to absolutely do it with happiness. To know that it's not just, again, commemorating a past event, but it's the time of now's the time. In fact, every single day is the time to receive it anew. But of course, as I've mentioned this concept before, every time a Yom Tov comes about, it's a spiritual well in the calendar from which we can go into and draw the spiritual energy from that particular Chag. And of course, the spiritual energy that comes around every year on Shavuot is the energy of renewal, being Makabel et HaTorah, receiving the Torah anew, like every day. So it's not going to be that it's a past tense that we received it, but it needs to be that every time, every day that we're receiving it anew. And of course, as I said, Shavuot is the one time in the year where we absolutely dedicate and focus our minds on that. We know that on all the Chagim, I mentioned to you, we have to rejoice in the festival. But in fact, the Gemara actually tells us that of all the festivals, Shavuot is the one that we should actually rejoice the most in. I don't know, if God forbid you only had enough money for the year and you need to decide, are you going to have a greater meal on Pesach or Sukkot or Shavuot? Simply put, you should spend a lot more on Shavuot. We really have to really celebrate with food and drink because of the joy. And I'll relate a story to you now, that we need to see that Torah really impacts meaningfully in our lives every single moment. So many of you may know the great Rabbi Aaron Kotler. So he was once giving a lecture, and in his lecture, part of the topic was, he mentioned that a person who supports Torah learning, who provides funds for Torah schools, for yeshivot, is going to get the same reward in Olam Haba. He's going to get the exact same reward as those Torah scholars themselves, those individuals who toiled and worked in Torah, who studied Torah day in, day out. The person that supports their studying, gives the financial backing to those institutions, is going to get the same reward. After hearing this lecture, a wealthy man approaches Rabbi Aaron Kotler. He tries to maybe challenge him, and he says, Rabbi, why should I even bother to study Torah at all? All I have to do is continue making my donations to the Torah institutions, and I'm going to be assured of immeasurable reward, same reward as them in the world to come. Rabbi Aaron Kotler, being the saintly individual, he didn't take exception, and his expression gave off that he was taking this question very, very seriously. And he responded to this wealthy businessman, and he said, yes, absolutely true. Your portion in the world to come is going to be exactly the same as those that learned Torah by you giving, even if you don't learn the same Torah yourself. Listen how he ends the statement. He said to this wealthy businessman, but your life in this world will never be comparable. There's a certain quality. There's a certain joy that Torah gives. So yes, I might not be involved. I'm going to give my money to support. Your chalik in the next world, your portion in the next world might be guaranteed, may be the same as that. But can you say your quality? Can you say your enjoyment, your fulfillment in this world? No, it's not going to be the same. Okay, just want to now go on to the concept of the impact of Mount Sinai, the eternal impact of standing at Mount Sinai, receiving the Torah. Okay, we need to understand that the purpose of creation, and again, even though creation predates the giving of the Torah hundreds of years, Torah, in fact, is the purpose of creation. We're told that when the Jewish people accepted the Torah on Mount Sinai, there were cosmic repercussions. The entire universe, and when I say universe, we talk about the physical, we talk about the spiritual realms, were affected, were impacted by that decision. And we're told that not only at that time, but it continues, that the entire universe is sustained by that decision. When Hashem created the world, Bereshit bara Elokim, right at the beginning, when Hashem created the world, he did it on condition that the Jews would ultimately accept the Torah. We actually have a verse in the book of Yirmiyahu from the prophet Jeremiah, which says, Ko amar Hashem. He says, so he says Hashem, Im loi briti yomam v'layla chukot shamayim va'aretz. I'm reading it here for you. Loi samti. If not for the covenant of the Torah day and night, says Hashem, I would not place the laws of heaven and earth. And Rashi in Bereshit says that the world was created because having in mind that auspicious day to come in the future, the 6th of Sivan, when the Torah would be given in the future. Okay, but not only, as I said, is Torah the end game, that the world was created for the Torah and with the giving of the Torah on the 6th of Sivan in mind, the Torah study continuing is important for the world to continue. And the world's continued existence, our rabbis tell us, only continues by virtue of the fact that Torah is being learned constantly. Reb Chaim of Volozhin actually says that if there would be a single moment in the world when Torah would not be studied, the entire world would cease to exist. The entire Torah would cease to exist. There needs to be Torah being studied all the time. And of course, if we're thinking about this on a global level, here we speak about the entire world being sustained by Torah. And of course, it also applies on the individual, the more micro level, how Torah sustains us as individuals. If I now come to the concept of the commitment to being Jewish, and it's really seen in the words that the Jewish people say at Mount Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma. When the Jewish people received the Torah, they didn't just have a contract which, so to speak, God gave them, or the intermediary Moses gave them, and they merely signed on the dotted line. No, they absolutely committed themselves to Hashem's will to do whatever Hashem wants from us unconditionally. Na'aseh v'nishma, we're going to do, and then we're going to listen. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wait to find out what was written in the Torah before they unequivocally, unconditionally committed to accept it before Hashem had even told them what was written there. We have it in the book of Shemot. Vayikach Sefer HaBrit. Moshe took the book of the covenant, Vayikra Baznei Ha'am, and he read in the ears, literally, before the people. And they said, Kol Hashem diber Hashem. Whatever Hashem is going to tell us, Na'aseh v'nishma. That's where we have those words we're going to do, and we're going to listen. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the famous Midrash, the Mechilta, which says that God offered the Torah to the other nations first. And again, what's the reason? That no one could ever come and say to the Jewish people, you're not so wonderful. Had we been offered the Torah, we would have been the chosen nation. We would have, Hashem specifically offered the Torah to the other nations first, and they declined. So, for example, Hashem appeared to the children of Esav, and he said to them, would you accept the Torah? They didn't say, Na'aseh v'nishma. What did they say? We said, okay, tell us what's written. Hashem said, okay, one of the things that's written is you shouldn't murder. So obviously the answer to Hashem, and they said, what do you mean don't murder? Our whole legacy, where we came from, our father Esav is built on murder. In fact, when Yitzchak gives the blessing to Esav, it says, Al char b'cha tichye, you're going to live by the sword. No, it's not for us. The Midrash says, and then he appears to the children of Ammon, same thing. Will you accept the Torah? They say, okay, what's in the Torah? And God answers, okay, one of the provisions is you shouldn't commit adultery. Again, the children of Ammon respond and say, what do you mean? We're the products. Ammon, we're the products of an adulterous relationship. If you recall, the daughters of Lot, thinking that Lot's the last man around, they father a child, and that gives birth to the nation of Ammon. Comes from adultery, comes from immoral behavior. Hashem appears to the Yishmael, to the children of Yishmael. Will you accept the Torah? Okay, same thing. What does it say? One of the provisions: don't steal. Again, they say, what do you mean don't steal? Yishmael was a wild man. He was uncontrolled. He stole everything. All of them refused to say it. The Jewish people, when Hashem said, "You want to accept the Torah?" They didn't say, "Okay, let's hear God. What is it, God? Give us a couple of the highlights." No, Na'aseh v'nishma, unconditionally we're going to do. We've accepted, and then later we'll find out exactly what it is that we've accepted. So the question is, we always hear the concept of Na'aseh v'nishma. We're going to do, and then we're going to listen, and it sounds amazing, and it is amazing, absolutely is amazing. But have we ever asked ourselves the questions, where do they get that fortitude? Where do they get that inner strength, the inspiration to resolve to say Na'aseh v'nishma, without hesitation, to say we're going to accept Hashem's Torah without even knowing a little bit of the contents? The truth is that when the Jews were standing at Mount Sinai, the clarity, the truth of Hashem's existence was beyond any doubt. It was absolutely crystal clear. They knew that they had to accept the will of Hashem, and the will of Hashem is obviously the Torah. They knew, it was so apparent to them that their entire function in this world was to serve Hashem. There could be nothing else. There was absolutely no doubt. So when they said Na'aseh v'nishma, it was simply just a product of that recognition, which was so stark before them. It was only obvious for them to say Na'aseh v'nishma. Hashem, we know, we can see it, it's absolutely so clear. This is our purpose. Na'aseh v'nishma, we don't have to first hear what's written in the Torah. It's absolutely so clear that we have to be subjugated to your will, that we're here to serve you, Hashem. That's our purpose in this world. And of course, that Na'aseh v'nishma, that faith. And in fact, I'm going to say something which maybe sounds a bit controversial, but I don't really think it is. When we speak about faith, we speak about belief. That what happened at Mount Sinai, it wasn't so much belief, it was absolute fact. Here we have 3 million Jews, 3 million people seeing Hashem, hearing Hashem, the revelation, and the greatest historical event of all kind. Here they are witnessing it, hearing it. There's absolutely no shadow of doubt. You know, they say seeing is believing. So we don't have to talk about belief. The Jewish people didn't have belief. Belief's taken away. They almost had no choice. You know, this interestingly fits in. I wasn't going to say it, but I just thought to mention it. You know, it's also the Midrash speaks about that the Jewish people were coerced. God held Mount Sinai over their heads as if they had no choice but to accept. And it's only when Purim comes along, when they now receive it anew. Now they have received it with joy. Now it's no longer coerced, but they really have the love of Hashem. Now they accept it anew. But forget the concept of holding a mountain on top of them. In a sense, it is coercion. In a sense, and again, I know we had the Shiur on free will before, but of course, maybe we say at that point there's no free will because it's such an obvious decision. That it is a God. You're hearing God speak. You're hearing God call Moses up before. You can see clearly that Moses is the intermediary, that Moses is the chosen one, that whatever Moses tells you is directly from Hashem. It's a given. You don't have scope to wiggle. You've seen God. I mean, think about it. If God came to you tonight, tomorrow, and absolutely told you, and you felt God, are you not going to keep kosher the next day? You're not going to keep Shavuot. So here we're talking about an absolute knowing and knowledge. We're talking about facts, not so much as belief. And of course, at that episode, that event where the whole nation sees, experiences God that never ever happened to any other nation in the history of the world. No other nation could ever claim such a thing because a lie could only perpetuate for maybe a generation, if that. But here you've got firsthand, everyone was there. They were telling the same story. It gets passed down from child, from father to son, etc., etc. It's an absolute given. Of course, we weren't there. Generations and generations later, of course, in fact, now turns into belief. We didn't see it firsthand. It's not factual for us, and that's obviously where we have to intensify our belief, our faith. And that's what Shavuot is each year when it comes around. It's again reinforcing our belief, trying to strengthen our belief in Hashem. And as I said, Shavuot is a natural opportunity. It's that spiritual well which comes around again. We have to draw on. And again, just as the Jewish people at that time were absolutely beyond doubt that Hashem is the true God, the Torah, everything about the Torah is absolutely true. So too, when Shavuot comes around each year, we have to have that same determination, that same strengthening of our faith in Hashem. Of course, what else Shavuot gives us kind of goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, is our own identity. We know that Torah isn't just an academic subject that someone reads or studies like he would study a scientific journal or any other type of academic work, but Torah is supposed to be lived. It's supposed to have an effect on us. It's supposed to be engraved, just like it says charut ala luchot. Engraved, it's supposed to be part of us, really inculcated into ourselves, that we become elevated, we become uplifted on all levels, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, through it. Chazon Ish, again, many of you familiar with a great halachic mind. And he says that Torah, so again, it's the same concept, that Torah is not just something that you do for like sharpening your intellect, but through Torah knowledge is going to bring a person to a greater level, a more exalted level, a higher spiritual awakening, a higher spiritual awareness. And if you think about it, every time of the great stories that you hear of the greats, of course, they were Torah scholars. Of course, they had encyclopedic knowledge of the Torah. But when you hear of them, their stories, why they resonate so deeply, why they touch us, not because the particular individual could quote what was on Daf 92 of Gemara Shabbos. No, because he was a pious individual. Their Torah knowledge, their learning caused them to become pious, caused them to become saintly, to almost attain superhuman levels of goodness, of kindness. I've told the story before, but I'm going to say it again in the context of what we're learning now. So again, another famous, pious Torah sage, Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen Kagan, better known as the Chofetz Chaim. So he had to once testify before a judge in a certain court case. The attorney who was arguing the case, he wanted to make sure that the judge would give the testimony of the evidence of the Chofetz Chaim the weight, the credence deserved. So he decided that he'd tell the judge a little about the Chofetz Chaim's character. So the attorney says, Your Honor, I've heard that this rabbi is a man of unparalleled virtue. In fact, I once heard that he witnessed a thief, a ganath, stealing some property from his home, and immediately ran after this thief, shouting, I forgive you, I forgive you. Rather than being concerned about the financial loss that he would be suffering, he wanted to make sure that the thief who stole from him didn't incur a sin. I forgive you. You're the owner. Take it. I want you to have it. So the judge apparently turned around and he scoffed and he said, I find that story impossible to believe. No human being could ever be possible of such an action. And the attorney turns around and he says, Your Honor, even if the story is not true, the mere fact that I heard it should attest to the rabbi's greatness of character. After all, Your Honor, they wouldn't even make up such a story about you or about me, said the lawyer of the Chofetz Chaim. Okay, also to state that I said before that Torah needs to be continuously learned to sustain the world. Not only was creation there for Torah as the end game, but Torah has to continuously be learned to sustain the world, to make sure that it exists in every moment. But the mitzvot itself are there to perfect the world, and the mitzvot themselves are there to perfect individuals. We know that when a person does a mitzvah, he becomes higher. If you can just picture, if you could picture that we're constantly on a ladder. Hopefully we've got good balance, and everything that we're doing is taking us that stage higher, that spiritual stage higher. We're perfecting ourselves every time that we do a mitzvah. We take it to a higher spiritual realm. Again, this is also how we can think about those two loaves. Remember, Mincha Chadasha, that offering of the two loaves. We can also say that on a deeper level, the offering of those loaves celebrates our attainment of a spiritual level. And that spiritual level is receiving the Torah. And every spiritual attainment, every time we do a mitzvah, it's as though it's something new. We bring something new into the world and new into ourselves. If I were to contrast it with a physical desire, so I don't know, you've gone on another trip. You've added another zero to your bank balance. Okay, it's gratifying, but after a while that physical feeling wanes. You've had a nicer, you've now found a better chocolate brownie. You thought that before you had the best chocolate brownie you've ever tasted. Oh, now you went to a new restaurant and wow, this is definitely the best chocolate brownie you've ever tasted. Okay, it's a new feeling, but you can't compare that newness to a spiritual revelation. You've learned a new section of Torah. You've heard a new Dvar Torah. You've done something in the realm of mitzvot that you never thought you could do before. Now you've attained it. Absolutely, it's new. It's an absolute new creation, not like a physical pursuit where it wanes so quickly and the newness isn't even new. It's a similar feeling, maybe just in another environment. Spirituality is every time we do a mitzvah, we go up another level. That is definitely a newness. Mincha Chadasha LaHashem, a new offering to Hashem. Okay, you've heard me speak about this so often, but again, I'm going to say it obviously in the context of this shiur. What was Matan Torah? Let me say it in a different way. We know that the Avot, the forefathers, kept Torah. kept the mitzvot of Torah, even before the 6th of Sivan, years, generations later. So what's different? So if we say that Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov kept the Torah, then why is Matan Torah on Shavuot, 7 weeks after the Jewish people came out of Egypt? What's so special about that? What differentiates it from the Torah that the Avot had? And the reason is, before Matan Torah, before God gave the Jewish people the Torah as a nation on Mount Sinai, yes, they had the mitzvot, they knew, but those mitzvot, that spirituality didn't come into the realm of the physical. So what I mean, you still had physical and you still had spiritual. Example I always give, you've heard it from me before, let's say the Avot put on tefillin. So they would have had the spirituality, but those leather boxes, that parchment remained physical. What happens after Mount Sinai, and it's alluded to, Vayered Hashem be'anan, God comes down, Vaya'al Moshe, Moshe goes up to the mountain. We have the fusion of the physical, the physical going up, the spiritual coming down. For the first time, we have the potential for spirituality to go into the physical, for the physicality to be viewed with spirituality. So in other words, now every aspect of our lives, everything we do on a daily basis has to have an element of spirituality in it. We have certain things that we have to do, just like animals. Animals have to eat, we have to eat. But when we pick up that apple and before eating it, we say a bracha on that apple, we've elevated something which is mundane, something which is physical, something that we have to do to survive. We've now made eating something spiritual. When we eat with good manners, when we bench afterwards, we've taken something physical and now it's made it spiritual. Procreation, sexual intimacy between husband and wife, same in the animal world. What's different? By observing the laws of Tarat HaMishpacha, family purity, the laws of mikveh, the laws of niddah, the laws of separation when man and woman has to be separated. Again, we've taken something so mundane, so animalistic, and we've made something that inherently physical, something spiritual. Again, going back to the ideas of the tefillin, that leather, everything now that was just part of an animal now is spiritual. And that's, of course, the reason why we have to bury tefillin or a Sefer Torah if, God forbid, it becomes possible, anything should happen to it. So now, after Matan Torah, man has the most incredible mission, is that we're able to turn our own physical bodies and the physicality around us into spirituality. The Kabbalists and the Hasidim call it Dira B'Tachtonim. We've created a dwelling place for Hashem down below. That spirituality is able to come into the physical. It's not that Hashem dwells above and we just live in the physical world. No, but we have to fuse both. Again, on the subject, I also want to say that the Jewish concept of spirituality isn't like some other religions. I'm not going to even name them, but spirituality, you might think of a person who sits alone on top of a mountain and maybe takes a vow of silence, maybe abstains from the pleasures of life, from good food, from wine. Maybe he's celibate as well. Maybe there's no intimacy with a woman. So for them, spirituality means separation. Torah is exactly the opposite. Hashem wants us to partake of this world. He wants us to partake of all the physical pleasures in this world, all of them. In fact, just as a quick aside, that's why the Nazir, the Nazarite, who, yes, he wants to get higher level of spirituality, he decides to abstain from certain things, but at the end of his period, his oath of Nazirut, he has to bring a sacrifice to the temple. Why? It's almost as an apology. So Hashem, I know you gave things to me to benefit, and I almost gave it back to you. I threw the gift back in your face, Hashem. Hashem doesn't want us to abstain. Hashem wants us to partake, but he wants us to partake in a way that's going to bring sanctity, that's going to bring spirituality to every small thing that we're doing. If it's a business transaction, if it's shopping at Checkers or Pick and Pay, how are we doing? How are we greeting people? Are we doing it in a nice way? Or are we just I don't know, going and if you think about it, I always make this joke that unfortunately it's not a joke, that if people aren't anti-Semitic before the weeks before Pesach come, and just seeing any Jew shop at Pick and Pay in Norwood before Pesach is enough to turn anyone into an anti-Semite. Schlepping, taking from everyone's trolley boxes, matzah, taking milk. No, in that action, you can absolutely sanctify Hashem's name. You can actually bring spirituality into those mundane moments of shopping, of a business transaction, of whatever it is. We're uplifting the physical. And of course, I've only given a couple of examples, but there are examples in everything. We have to make sure that the physical, everything physical, and again, we are there to partake, we're there to enjoy. So many brachot are referred to as brachot hanein, blessings of enjoyment. Hashem wants us to enjoy, but say the blessing over it. Put spirituality into it. Don't let it just remain in the realm of the physical, uplift it so it becomes spiritual as well. And again, just to conclude, we have to see Shavuot, please God, Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, that Torah wasn't just given in the past. It happens every single year. As I said, it happens every single moment. But we have to, and again, I alluded to it earlier in the Kiddush, Zman Matan Toratenu. Now is the time of receiving the Torah. Now is the time. Also, it says, beautiful idea, and maybe I'll end on this. When it speaks about the Jewish people coming to Mount Sinai, it doesn't say Bayom Ahu Ba'u Midbar Sinai. It says Bayom Hazeh. Bayom Hazeh. This day they came to Mount Sinai. Of course, it makes no sense. Structurally, grammatically, it doesn't make sense. It should be like everywhere else. Bayom Ahu, it says it on that day. Bayom Hazeh, this day. Every day we have the opportunity to bow, to come again, and to receive the Torah, and to try take on new mitzvot, to try and learn other aspects of the Torah that we didn't think we could, we would enjoy, to try see what mundane, what physical thing we can try now elevate by just adding some godliness, some spirituality into it, and to make sure that every day we, so to speak, chaparah, and we take advantage. Please God, this Shavuot, we should take the opportunity of to once again receive the Torah with gladness, with happiness, just as the Jewish people did over 3,300 years ago, and to see it as a real gift that it is, to see it's the gift of connecting with Hashem, the gift of refining ourselves, the gift of partnering with Hashem to uplift the world, to bring the world to a closer state of perfection. Please God, we should merit to really see the joy in the Torah, not as something onerous, not as something difficult, but as something beautiful that we can really celebrate. The Samachta B'Chagecha may be a joyous Shavuot for all of us. As I mentioned when I was just speaking to my brother just before we started the Shiur, we all know about the difficulties going on in Jerusalem at the moment. And of course, the irony is that we've just come out of Yom Yerushalayim. And, people who think, who purport, and they say that Jerusalem is holy to them, to be sending missiles across, that people in Beit Shemesh have to go into shelters. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's unheard of. Hashem should just bring about peace there, peace in Jerusalem, peace in Israel, peace everywhere in the world. I wish everyone that, please God, I'll see most of you on Shavuot, but wish everyone a good Shavuot. Dave, was wonderful speaking to you earlier today, and I'll have the answer for you, please God, tomorrow. But good yontif to you, good yontif to everyone, and I wish long life to Aubrey. Aubrey and Ada have Yortzeit tonight, so wish Arichas Yom Tovim, good long life to Aubrey and Ada, and just a good night to everyone.
Yeah.